Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Read Tifas, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Island in the Stars, written by Voltstagge. The endless black ocean of stars was lit up by distant sparks as ships detonated in the last seconds of life. Every twinkle of light was dozens of lives lost to wanton destruction and senseless conflict. I didn't even know why they were fighting. Maybe no one did. There were no hails or warnings, just the immediate absence of order. None of the warships bothered to check who was in their sight when they opened fire. Or maybe they had. Maybe all they saw was a small hauler that wasn't flying their colors and decided that was enough. The sides always seemed to be shifting. First, it was the Orion Spur group against the Sagittarius United Council. Then it was the Sagittarius against the Sinai from the far rim. Then the Sinai against the Orion. Then Sagittarius against the Magellanic species in the voids between galaxies. Then Orion and Sagittarius against the Sinai, and on and on. It seemed as though every time a new fight had broken out, the lines had been redrawn. Perhaps there never had been lines in the first place, and it was an ever-changing free-for-all between nation titans as people like me tried to stay out from under their trampling feet. Tried being the operative word. Luck was the only reason my struggling lungs drew breath. Every double beat of my heart sent a fresh jolt of pain through my sides as I felt little more blood leak out. The pilot harness was already strained to a deep blue, and several droplets had already floated into my face in the zero-G, or onto the chipped and faded walls of the cockpit, ruining the already poor paint. With my one free hand on the ship's controls, I did the only thing a no-name trader with nothing of significant value could do: run away. Pain made it all but impossible to perform proper jump calculations, so I didn't bother. None of my recent shift stops had anything that could patch up a wound or repair a ship. So I aimed the nose of my vessel at a random star and engaged the shift drive. I murmured a prayer to the young gods that the shell hadn't damaged my shifter drive and this jump wouldn't end up with my body scattered across 1,000 kilometers. It didn't matter what to me or awaited on the other end of the jump, so long as I was there to see it. At the very least, pirates might be apologetic if they raided my ship. There was a ripple in the black ocean as the drive stretched open the threads in the fabric of reality. In an instant, the stars were gone, and I shifted. Beyond the final frontier, there was nothing, everywhere, forever. They said that with a sufficiently powerful telescope and a bit of luck, you might even be able to see the other ships that were shifting at the same time, but I doubted it. It was just nothing, everywhere, since and until forever. At that instant, you were well and truly alone, and dozens of double beats of the heart later, the process played back in reverse as pinpricks of light began to fill the endless void, and just like that, it was over. No inertia, no jolt, no sound. Whoever had heard my prayer must have found me insufficiently fervent pious, because the shift had barely even finished before half my engines died. The remaining thrusters tried and failed to compensate, and the change in angular momentum sent my ship tumbling in the void. Sensing the failure, the ship automatically shuttled power to the engines to prevent the constant tumbling acceleration from making me sick, but it didn't matter. It is a strange sensation to come to grips with the fact that you've exhausted all of your options and there is nothing left for you to do. With my thrusters ruined, I couldn't aim the ship for another jump, and should I have chanced it, my current spin would probably be enough to cause the shift drive to fail before it could establish a route. Even if my wound wasn't fatal, I didn't have enough food to eat or tools to repair the damage. This is it, I thought to myself. Here's to the worst 5, best 15 years of a trader's career. Would that I could have had more than 7. In the end, I'd lived a simple, unexciting life. I didn't try and upset the status quo, and contented myself with carving out a meager, quiet career that provided just enough money to continue living. No one hated me. Then again, I doubted anyone thought about me at all. Quiet, unobtrusive, and safe up until it wasn't. How many other people had found themselves in this situation? How many Sinai traders spent their last moments trying to patch wounds in their hemorrhaging bioships? Were there Megalenian threes trying to send out memory capsules so their family could add them to their legacy walls even now? Could there be a human out there, grasping for any support as the artificial gravity in their ring ships failed, tearing their structures apart? If there were, I hoped that they would fare better. There was no choice for me but to wait it out, until either the hunger or the blood loss stopped my hearts, and I drifted off. With a resigned sigh, I activated the emergency protocols. An automated transponder began broadcasting, and a chemical cocktail began feeding into my flight suit to slow my body process down to conserve energy. I closed my eyes and let the artificial sleep take me as I floated adrift in the endless ocean of stars. If I didn't wake up, I hoped the far side would be more peaceful than this. I awoke to the sight of a gas giant filling my view. The light blue clouds seemed to ripple like waves, illuminating my ship. It was an island in an ocean of stars, and nowhere did I see the spark flash of war. It took me a moment longer to realize I was no longer spinning out of control. The remaining thrusters couldn't have done that, and I was too far away from the planet for gravity to have had any notable effect. "Stay calm. Everything is going to be all right." It was the first voice I had heard in days. The pronunciation was off, and they lacked the sub-bass twang that my species had when speaking. My suspicions were confirmed when a human pulled themselves into my view. Like many people who spend prolonged periods in zero-G, his blonde hair was cut short. Wall straps and buckles kept his clothes and equipment in place. A recovery tether connected him to the wall so that he wouldn't end up stuck somewhere with nothing to push off of. "I'm going to remove you from your flight cradle to take you to the infirmary. Is that okay?" he asked, holding himself in front of me. In the reflected light of the gas giant, his white void suit almost seemed to be glowing, and it was difficult to focus on him. Or maybe that was just a blood loss. "Do it," my voice came out as a wheezing gurgle. With practiced precision, he began disconnecting the restraints of my harness, slowly releasing me from my ship. "I will remove your medical harness now," he said as he moved on to the final steps. "This may be painful." I nodded and immediately regretted it. The instant the medical harness was removed, the pleasant numbing sensation the ship had been feeding me vanished with it, and I was made acutely aware of my wound. I howled in agony. And then gravity stirred me. It was the first thing I noticed when I was roused from the hazy twilight state of unconsciousness. My eyes refused to open, and my limbs felt like they had melted. But it was impossible to not recognize gravity after days without it. The old joke about gravity being a clingy friend came to mind. My faculties returned to me one by one, and after each one I was waiting for the pain in my side to resume. It never came. With some effort, I managed to focus on my wound, finding it cleaned and stitched up. The autodoc latched over the wound and informed me that I had a few days before I would need to replace the store of painkillers. An empty blood tank was connected to the autodoc, and with an easy yank, I disconnected it. Satisfied that I wouldn't pass out, I got to my feet and assessed the situation. I didn't need to be a human to be familiar with what one of their infirmaries looked like, even if it was more dated than I was accustomed to. A few of the machines looked older than some of the pilots I met on the trade routes. No one else was here, and a small note had been left by my bedside. "Ring bell if need help. Meet down hall door 1. It read in scratchy, spiraling letters. I appreciated the human's efforts to write in my language, but he was clearly more fluent speaking it than writing it. There didn't seem to be a bell in the infirmary, but after so many days strapped into a cradle and having my muscles exercised by electrocurrents, it seemed a good idea to have a real walk. The hallway outside the infirmary was also dated in its own way. Unlike many ships or orbital stations, the walls had pictures and artwork of various planets hanging on them. There were a few scattered pictures of the human who rescued me alongside other humans, but I didn't have enough experience differentiating human faces to glean much information. A few panels had been removed and replaced with different colored ones, and the texture on the floor had been worn smooth in a few choice places. It felt lived in, cared for, loved, peaceful. This wasn't just a station. It was a home. When was the last time I'd been in a home? You got used to living out of a box when working in the endless black. Every article of clothing was extra weight, which meant extra fuel, which meant that you packed only the barest essentials. You could travel on 100 ships, and the only defining feature would be the color of the walls, assuming that you decided to spend your precious little disposable income on paint. That was for after the worst 5 years were behind you and the best 15 started. I still had yet to buy paint. Not even the Megalanian trees enjoyed living in space, and their artificial muscles didn't atrophy like ours did. There was no door labeled 1, but I did find a 1 with an A written on it. Must have been a translation error. The characters for numbers and letters in my language were difficult to differentiate, even for natural-born speakers. The human opened the door after I knocked. "Feeling better?" he asked, stepping aside so I could enter. "As good as I can be after seeing the border or to the far side," I said, entering the dim room. It was a small kitchen filled with a table that could fit 12 people around it. It was only a single-place setting. "There should be some nutrient shakes that are compatible with your biology in the fridge," the human said, motioning to the lone appliance that looked somewhat new. "Not many, but at least a few days' worth. I also slowed down the drum a bit, so the gravity should be closer to what you're used to." That surprised me. Humans were similar enough to me that I wouldn't have been unable to walk in their normal gravity. It would have just been uncomfortable. Likewise, I had more than enough nutrients on my ship to sustain me. "That is very generous of you," I said. "It is the least I can do," the human said. I didn't yet have it in me to dispute that point. My body was still half asleep. "Do you want to go to the observatory? 0G may be valuable for keeping weight off your injury." The human motioned at another exit from the kitchen. That did sound nice. I grabbed one of the nutrient shakes and followed him through the doors and into the brightly lit corridor. This one was much longer than the infirmary corridor that I could see the end of the hallway curve upwards. Like many human ships, gravity didn't come from continual acceleration, but rather the spinning of their drum-shaped bodies. In the light, I got a better view of my savior. By my measure, this human was in the older side of life. Grey streaks ran through his once blonde hair, and wrinkles surrounded his kind eyes. He had a scar on his cheek, but it was old and all but unnoticeable. From what I saw of humans, he was unexciting in the same sense that he lacked defining features that were invaluable for other species trying to differentiate people who looked nothing like themselves. An elevator on the side took us upwards to the center of the barrel. The closer we came, the lower the gravity got, until it vanished altogether. The liquid in the nutrient shake started to float in the bottle, but the smart cap stopped it from spilling everywhere. I took a large drink. It tasted bland and inoffensive. The doors opened up to a rotating passage just wider than a person. It took no effort to push myself forward, floating down the corridor. The ground spun out from beneath my hovering feet, and the ceiling above me fell below me in an endless, gentle spin. Despite that, the corridor was actually stationary, and it was me who was spinning, having been on an elevator connected to the main drum. It was somewhat nauseating, and one of the main reasons I preferred ships with acceleration gravity. I grabbed hold of a ladder rung on the side of the corridor, matching the rotation of the station. With the now stationary reference frame, it felt much more natural to travel the last few feet to the hatch at the end of the corridor. "Let me," the human said, floating past me to pry the thick airlock open. The view on the other side stole my breath away. The gas giant I saw earlier filled a third of the seamless glass dome. Its blue atmosphere shone like sapphire, undulations and storms reminding me of the marble I mined in my youth, or the seas I sailed with my mother. It was an ocean of blue stone in the nothing of space. Green auroras made a halo around the pole of the planet, suffusing the clouds with a surreal glow. An island of peace in the craze of societies. Twin moons were rising into their field of view, pockmarked by craters and other impacts. A third, more distant moon even appeared to have a thin coating of atmosphere, judging by the haziness around it. If I pressed my head against the glass, I could just make out the edge of the drum in its endless spin while we stayed still. "There's going to be a small meteor shower in a little bit," the human said. "The forecast suggests that those which don't hit Oasis will burn up in the atmosphere. It'll be quite the sight." "Where are we?" I asked. Astronomers and explorers were notoriously bad at reusing certain names for every new discovery, but none of the gas giants I knew were named Oasis. "This system is called Manaria," the human said. "2 planets, Oasis being one. The other is dwarf in a tight orbit around the G-class star. There is nowhere habitable except for whatever you arrived in. Some Sinai wanted to set up a small mining operation here, but a spate of bad luck lost them several ships and crew. Manaria never managed to shake its reputation, and it's been empty since. The 2 of us are the only people for a dozen light years in any direction." "So, why are you here?" I asked. Was it rude to press your savior for answers? Perhaps, but I'm a trader, and the first lesson a trader learns is that nothing is free, not even bland nutrient shakes. There is always someone footing the bill. The human shrugged. "The star reminds me of home." "There are many G-class stars in the galaxy," I said, "plenty closer to civilizations." "True, but Manaria is right near the triple point of Orion, Sagittarius, and Sinai," he said, pushing himself off the wall to drift across the observation deck. "Out of the last 23 sol years since I arrived here, 17 of those years were spent with a conflict happening along one or more of the borders. The remaining 6 years were full of border skirmishes. Every time a battle broke out, there would always be people caught in the middle. People like you, just trying to get by. They scatter to the winds at the sight of danger. Most flee to safety of home space. Many are injured or are piloting damaged ships. Some end up here." "And then what?" I said, keeping myself close to the walls. Getting stranded in the middle of space during zero-G was something of a phobia warrior of mine. "I patch their wounds and repair their ships," the human said matter-of-factly. "And then what?" The human caught himself on the wall and stopped his drift. He looked at me in the eyes and seemed to understand. "Then nothing. They move on, live their lives." Why what?" "It can't be easy cheap to keep this place stocked with all the necessities. Repairs will hurt your budget as well. No one does this without a motive. What is it? Do you skim cargo? Is this a drop point for smuggling operation?" Blunt? Yes. Something didn't seem right, and I wanted to find out before I returned to civilization to find a chunk of my cargo missing. It wouldn't take much to put me in debt for years. "You wouldn't believe my motive." "Try me." "I want to help people," he said. "And?" There is no and," he replied. "I'm just an old retiree with money and time. I get nothing out of this arrangement." He was half right. I did believe that he was an old and had too much money. No sane person should risk their life out in the lawless space without so much as a pistol to defend themselves. There were plenty of other way stations out there in the empty like this, but they all had their price. It was always steep, but when the options are to pay or drift endlessly, he always managed to find money. He must have seen my disbelief. "Why can't I just help people? Why is extorting some poor soul on the edge of death more believable than someone just being a good person?" "Because being a good person doesn't pay well," I said. In the quiet of the space, his laughter was like a funeral bell. "Why does it always come down to money and dirt? Sinai wants systems so they can sell every precious stone they find. Sagittarius wants systems so they can control the shipping lanes. Orion wants systems so they can sell water to dry worlds. Megalanians want systems so they can build more processors. It's all just dirt or money." "Hard to live without dirt and money," I countered. "So why would I steal someone's?" he asked. "Is that really all there is to it?" I asked, floating over to where I could get a view of the drum near the edge of the dome. You are spending God knows how much money to sit out here in the middle of a forgotten nowhere, waiting for lost causes to fall into your lap?
Of course, the human said. I can't stop the nations from hating each other. I can't cure cancer or solve poverty or end hunger. I just do what I can. Sometimes it only takes a single person to save a lost cause, and that's reward enough for me.
We floated there in silence for some time. Another moon began to poke its way around the horizon of Oasis. The stars were motionless against the backdrop of the empty. One could almost imagine that the entire universe was like this. An endless expanse of islands in the dark, scattered people watching the celestial grandeur pass by. I knew better. The systems never rested. How many people have come through here? I said, disappointed that I broke the silence.
49 ships, 77 people in total, counting you.
And how many times have pirates tried to rob you? Morbid curiosity prompted the question, and I regretted it immediately.
Just once. They boarded the station, beat me bloody, broke a few of my fingers, gave me the scar, stole food, appliances, and some other materials. They left me to die. You'd be amazed at how long a human can survive without food, he said. Despite the gruesome details, he didn't have any maliciousness or anger in his voice. I was the 18th person to be saved here. Another ship found me, patched me up, and got me back on my feet. They gave me enough food to last me a year.
That didn't encourage you to defend yourself?
Of course not. What use would it be? There is only one of me, and the years have taken the toll. It'd be a bad end. I'd rather pass on with clean hands, he said with a heavy sigh. It is stupid to be all the way out here, unarmed and alone. Every time I see someone shift in, I hold my breath to see if they are pirates. At any time, another ship could drop in and destroy the station without a second thought. I gamble that they won't. So far, it's worked out. An automated repair drone drifted past the window, thrusters performing microscopic course corrections as it headed to its destination. Following its path, I let my eyes drift to the human, and I could see just how old he was. The reflected light from the planets highlighted every deep wrinkle in his face and shone through his thinning hair. He was older than I initially thought, but he was still here. Thank you, I said at last. Truly, you offered your help to me when you had no reason to, and I'm only alive because of your generosity. But it's easy to hurt, and it's so hard to heal, he said, not meeting my gaze. My favorite days are the quiet ones, when no one is around but me. I'd come up here and stare up at the stars for hours on end. I liked to dream that everything was good, that there weren't thousands of people dying every day because of wars they didn't want to be involved in. It was a lie, but lies are more comfortable than the truth. Then someone drops in, and I wake up.
Surely not every visitor is bad news.
Sometimes they are low on fuel, or made a mistake during a shift and got lost. 3 times for the former, twice for the latter. Easy fixes, the human said, counting off the details on his fingers. No one comes here if they want to. Even so, I try to keep a positive attitude. Even if every wounded ship is a reminder of the truth, I can try and make my dream a reality.
My apologies for questioning your honor, Word, I said.
Honesty was rare out here, and it shamed me to spit in the first welcoming hand I found. Every single one of them expected the same thing when I picked them up: piracy. It took a while for me to convince most of them that I was honest. Several even fired upon me, he continued. It is taken as a fact of life that if a stranger finds you out in the empty, you are about to be robbed, killed, or both. So I don't blame you. It's the way of things, and it takes a long time for the way to change. Another drone drifted by the window, green lights on its side blinking in a mesmerizing pattern. Seems the repairs on your ship are finished, the human said, giving the drone a wave as it left their field of view. I took the liberty of giving you some fuel. Should be enough to get you to any one of the borders from here.
With a gentle shove against the glass dome, the human started floating backwards towards the exit. He didn't need to look to adjust his course or orient himself with the elevator. I was less graceful, but managed to make it back with little trouble. As the elevator lowered us into the drum and gravity reasserted itself, the human passed me a small package.
Painkillers for the auto doc, he explained, motioning to my bandaged side. There is a syringe to inject it into your nutrient streams if you prefer to do it that way. You should probably head back to civilization and find a hospital. Make sure I did my job right."
"It doesn't feel that painful," I said, chancing a glance down at the stitched-up wound on my side.
"Consider it a favor for me," he said, leading me down the corridor.
Out one of the windows, I could see my ship, looking a bit worse for wear, but better than I'd hoped for. The airlock to it was open and inviting. My home awaited. "You never told me your name," I said, stopping on the threshold of the airlock.
"Does it matter?" the human smiled. "I'm no one special."
I disagreed, but didn't press the subject. "Thank you once again," I said, offering my hand in the customary human greeting.
"It was the least I could do,"
he repeated as he took my hand, and once again I put back my disagreement. Saving a life was never a forgettable action, regardless of what he said.
"I'll go to unlock the docking clamps from the bridge. It may be a few minutes, so take the time to get settled. Take care out there. Perhaps you'll see each other again on the far side."
On the far side, I agreed and headed down the umbilical to my ship. Once I was sure the human was out of sight, I popped the hatch to the cargo hold and grabbed a crate. There was enough preserved food in there to last someone a long time. I struggled a bit, but managed to get it all the way back down the umbilical without dropping it or reopening my wound. Double-checking the human wasn't nearby, I left it on the floor and closed the door behind. It was a trader's first lesson that everything had a price, and I was not about to steal. My profits would take a hit, but I was willing to take on some debt. By the time I got strapped into the pilot's cradle and docking clamps had already been unlocked, a message from the human blinked at my console, asking me if there was a problem. "Just making sure everything was squared up before leaving," I replied, as I completed the pre-flight checks. As I did, I couldn't help but notice that he had repainted my ship during the repairs. There wasn't a single chip or flaking paint anywhere. With a distant thump, the ship released and I floated into the void, leaving the human and his lonely station behind me. As I powered up my shifter drive and plotted a course, I hazarded a parting glance at Oasis. The sun was behind the planet now. A brilliant halo of light surrounded the gas giant. The black ocean in the eclipse was lit up by sparks as meteors burned up in the atmosphere. Each one lasted only a fraction of a second, then was gone. But for a moment, it was there and it burned bright. Everything was quiet, peaceful, and I could see the human's dream. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Draxoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.